and the metric that goes along with it in terms of assisting policyholders and decision makers?
Well, I'm not all that entranced per se with statistical analysis as a way of understanding our world generally. There was a very influential article that came out in the New Yorker about 2 years ago. I'm sorry I forgot the name of the author, but the article said essentially Manhattan was the greatest model for green, sustainable living because you could cram so many people into the footprint of a building, that is the square feet. In 1,000 or 10,000 square feet of a building space, you could cram 50 stories of people living in apartments, okay? So that was one statistical way of understanding sustainability. But in my view, it was completely wrong-headed because we're not even taking into account the fact that skyscrapers may not be sustainable building types. If we don't have a cheap and reliable natural gas supply, methane gas, we're not going to be able to heat those skyscrapers in New York City. So, the statistical view of things can lead us down pathways that are very misleading and eventually have terrible consequences.
You mentioned the decline of the U.S. passenger rail system as regrettable and the desirability of building that back up again. What about the future of air travel?
Very good question. I fly now and again, and I've noticed over the last 5 years an incredible process of decrepitation out there in the airlines. It seems, one particular airline that will go unnamed that I flew in the last 10 days twice seems to have 3 employees in the whole airline. They fly the planes, they clean the planes, they give you your boarding pass, they check your luggage in. The airlines are like the canaries in the coal mine. The great airline fleets that are owned both by the private companies and the national airlines, we're not going to change the hardware. We're stuck pretty much with the hardware that we've got, the Boeings and the Airbuses and the Embraers that run on liquid hydrocarbon fuels. They're either going to run on liquid hydrocarbons or they're not going to run. And also, the economic equation that goes into that has to work right. The liquid hydrocarbon fuels have to be cheap enough because it's about 40% of their operating costs. So if aviation fuel goes up to $5 a gallon or $6 a gallon, what happens then? My guess is that commercial aviation is not going to be with us that far into the future except as one of those elite activities. And that even that may not continue. You can't get from Columbus, Ohio, the capital of Ohio, to Cleveland on a train. That's crazy. You can't get from Atlanta to Nashville. We've got to do better.
One of the problems that's been more and more pronounced in recent decades is the maldistribution of wealth. The haves have an increasingly high percentage of income, and the have-nots have an increasingly small proportion of that. Do you see this long emergency that you're talking about exacerbating that phenomenon?
Historically, what happens in cases that are like this is you get people, especially given our problem with food production and having to make a shift now between industrial food production of cheeseburgers and cheese doodles and going back to local, smaller scale farming that will require more human attention, there's a whole prospect for a group who retains wealth and land and a group of dispossessed, underemployed, starving perhaps, new class of people who are going to be very desperate. And those are the kinds of conditions historically that produce revolutions. They produce seizures of property. They produce what is called the circulation of elites, in which one group of elites is thrown out and another group rises and takes their place. These are, historical processes, and we've seen them happen before. And so you can probably state categorically that it's very dangerous when you see this trend building and building, and we should be concerned about it.
Here's a question from an audience member who says, "My favorite local farmer is struggling to stay afloat. What can he do to keep his small, local organic farm in the black until our policies and consumer demand catch up?"
Well, I wish I could pretend that I was an agronomist, and I'm not. And I can't give your friend really useful advice. Although there are people who are doing farming that we see doing it in a different way that they can do profitably. We went about 3 weeks ago to a very large convention of the Pennsylvania Association of Sustainable Farmers. And it was a very impressive group of people for a number of reasons. One was a lot of them were really young. They were young people who had gotten into farming. They were really healthy looking. You know, they didn't look like these lumbering brutes that I see in the airport concourses, you know. They were healthy, they were young, and they were really intelligent. And they were very, very interested in what they were doing. And that, to me, was a tremendously important sign that there's a cohort of people out there who are interested in this important issue and doing something about it, and doing it happily and doing it energetically. And you know, it was a real shot in the arm for me to see that. There are organizations all over the U.S. for sustainable agriculture, and they're full of energetic, healthy, smart young people.
That was James Howard Kuntsler, author of The Long Emergency and other books, speaking last March. He has a website and blog, which is worth checking out at kunstler.com. That's Kunstler.com.